Hi, we're going to carry on with, I guess, some of the more introductory topics before we get into developing a project, because once we start developing the project, of course, we want our computer program to be set up the way we need it to be set up so that we can interpret the information that's being presented to us in a way that we understand, and that might be different one person to the next. And of course, with the last video, if you didn't see it, I'll put a link up here for you to follow, where I basically walk you through the environment itself and how to switch views and manage your space. So that's obviously very important if you're going to be effective with the program. But what we're going to talk about this morning really is, how does it present the information, and how do we save our preferences in a way that means that every time we open a project file, it's going to be displaying it in a way that we recognize and understand, and that's going to enhance our efficiency with the project. So we're going to do that today. So I've got an empty file open. It's based on the basic new template that you would find in Microsoft Project. And what I'm going to do is talk our way through some of the changes that we want to consider. Again, everybody is free to choose preferences that make sense for you and the way you look at a project. But I'll make some suggestions based on my experience. So we're going to look at what changes you might want to consider, and then, having come up with a selection, identified the way that you would like Microsoft Project to, by default, present its information, save it to our own personal template, so that when we start a new project, we're going to get those settings up front. Obviously, they're just defaults at that point in time. You can go ahead and change them and modify them depending on what you're doing in the moment, and get it to display the way you want to. So we have this empty project open. What I want to do is, just so that you can see the impact of some of the changes that I'm suggesting, is I'm going to populate this with some project information, some tasks, and some predecessors, so that you can see the impact. And then I'll delete all of those tasks before we go and save the changes. So I'm just going to flip over to Excel, where I have a project saved. So I have a work breakdown structure saved with a series of tasks in a hierarchy. I've done a PERT calculation to get an estimate for durations, and I even have my predecessors saved here, because I can do that here just as well as I can do in project. So let me do some copying and pasting. Follow along if you want, and we're just going to populate this project with this information. Okay, so I've put all the essential information in, and based on the defaults of the program, this is exactly what you would see, which doesn't seem hugely useful right off the bat. So there's a number of things that we want to change, both in how it displays and how it calculates by default, which I think make it it suits my workflows. I hope you can find the right settings to suit your workflows. So anyway, we have it populated, so now we'll be able to see the impact of some of these changes. So let's go do it. So the first thing that you might want to do, so if we go up to project information, you can change work times in calendars. So if we bring up our project information, you can see it has a standard calendar. And so if I drop this down, you can see that it comes pre-programmed with a few calendars. So what I would suggest is right off the bat, before you get into a project, if you have a standard work calendar which you use in your work or at your business, to make sure that that is available at this point in time. Now, we'll cover how to do calendars or adjust the calendars and save them as a custom calendar a little bit later. We're going to be doing that. But what you want to do is to make sure that if you do have one or more standard calendars that you use on a regular basis, let's get them programmed now and saved into our template so that they're always available to you. There are a couple ways to do that. And like I say, we'll cover it. But you would want to take the time to do that now. So let's cancel out of that, and let's look at some of the things that we might want to do. Okay, before we get into the visual cues and setting up our computer program for visual cues, the reason why these are all kind of that teal color is because they're manually scheduled. So if we look down here at the bottom, we see by default, new tasks are manually scheduled. And of course you can change that just by dropping it down. Of course it's dropping down below and choosing auto scheduled. That would mean any new tasks that you're making are going to be auto-scheduled. And so that's one of the changes that we want to do. By default, I always want my tasks to be auto-scheduled. So I'm going to make that change. I'm going to choose auto-scheduled, but that's not going to help me with these tasks that are here before. Or what I want to do is to go in here, instead of manually scheduled, make it auto-scheduled. And then I can just like in Excel, I can pick up that little drag box and drag it down and turn them all into auto-scheduled tasks. And you can see now that based on the predecessors, those causal dependencies, if you will, the program now is able to schedule those tasks based on those dependencies because it's being auto-scheduled. And that's usually where we're going to want to be. The other thing that I want to do, and this is just for visualization, is all of these are subordinate tasks to the overall task, which is the bathroom renovation. So if I go to task, I can indent those, and that's going to make the bathroom renovation an overall summary task. Or I'll now indent each of the tasks associated with the subtasks. And now we can see those summary tasks, and they're shown here with a thin black bar with two ends on it, which start and finish for the summary task itself. And so we can see the overall project where it is. With that done, we're kind of in a situation where we'll be able to see the impact of some of our choices. So let's do that. Let's go to Format. And on the Format bar, we have a number of things that I personally like to have selected all of the time. So by default, summary task is chosen, and I think summary tasks really help to organize your Gantt chart. So I like to keep that checked. Now you can check or not check your project summary task. And what the project summary task does is it adds this dummy task in for overall, and it's basically duplicating what we had here. So we had a bathroom renovation, so we manually added a summary task for the overall project. This one is just held behind the scenes, and that way you can save yourself a line. You can turn it on, turn it off. Doesn't really matter which way you go. You probably should have a summary task, whether it's just by clicking that box or adding one in manually. So I'm just going to delete this summary task. And everything rolls up to the summary task. And then if we go back to Format, and we can turn that on or off, and it's always there. Now you notice it's showing as gray instead of black, just because it's not a specific task within our work breakdown structure. Okay, so other things that we probably want to do. So personally, I like to have the critical tasks shown. So at this stage, I'm kind of hoping that you have an appreciation for critical path method and understand what that critical path is or is not. This is our shortest duration path through the project start to finish. Any delays on the critical path are going to delay the project overall. And so that gives them an importance relative to the tasks that aren't on the critical path, that have some slack, if you will, that gives you more room to maneuver when it comes to scheduling those tasks. So it is, probably good practice that you have those critical tasks shown. I certainly like it, and so I'm going to check that box. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to check the slack box. Now you see the little bars extending off the edge of the blue tasks. Well, the blue tasks are the non-critical activities. And the slack is the amount of time that you could delay that task before it becomes critical. And so that's a really good piece of information to know. And so I like to have that shown. So we're going to choose slack. And, the other ones I may choose at different times or not. But certainly these ones I like to have on as a regular basis, and by default I like it to have it come up that way. So I'm going to select all of those. Now the next place I'm going to stop is I'm going to look at the Gantt chart portion itself. So over here where our tasks are, I'm just going to view, extend that out a little bit so we can see a bit easier. I can also shrink my entry area in entire project so we see our project. I personally find that the absence of any grid lines within the project can make it very difficult to tell what the task is. Now obviously if I select it, you can see where it is, but that's not always helpful. Certainly at different projects, I can remember printing off the Gantt chart using a plotter, because they can get rather long, and it helps to have some grid lines in order to be able to line all of this stuff up. So let's see about doing that. So just free floating in here in a place that is otherwise not used, I'm going to right click and we can see some of the things that we can modify or change. And so I'm going to select grid lines, and the first thing I'm going to worry about are the Gantt rows. So I'm going to want straight lines, and I'm going to choose the color. Now you have to play a little bit with what color works well for you depending on your monitor, whether you're printing, because it matters, it makes a difference. So I'm going to choose the slightly darker than white. Actually, I'll go one darker just so we can see it. And then what I also find useful is if I go to an interval of every 5 and I do the same thing, I have a straight line, but I just make it one shade darker. So we chose that one. So let's go one shade darker. And I say OK. Now you can see these horizontal lines in our Gantt view, and it really helps to keep lined up. Now, some people might not want them. They find it crowding the space. That's fine. Find out what works for you. This works for me. Now, it makes sense that if I'm going to, so my every grid line matches up with the sheet over here, but not the every 5. So I'm going to choose grid lines again. And in this case, I'm going to choose the sheet rows. And so this one has already been chosen, and that's by default. And what I'm going to do is do the same thing as I did the last time, choose a straight line, one darker shade every 5. And now those lines are going to carry across both parts of the view. So I can see my tasks lined up, and I get a slightly darker line every fifth one. And so that works for me. Find out what works for you. Now, the other thing that you can play with is your bar styles. And so it'll bring up a dialog box, and this is where you can define the colors or the shapes of all the different kinds of bars that the Gantt chart will use. So as you can see on here, we're using, we have summary tasks, we can see milestones, we can see the normal everyday task. If we go down, we'll see critical tasks. We're down here, critical tasks, the Slack, and all of that. So here's where you can make this look the way you like it to look. And then, like I say, if you keep it the same all the time, whenever you open up a project, you're going to see it that way, and it'll be easy to interpret. So I used to change a lot of these. I used to update them and modify them because I found in older versions of Microsoft Project, I wasn't fond of the default settings that it chose. To be fair, at 2019, I find this version has fairly good default settings. So I don't change a lot. I do change a couple things, probably just because of history and what I got used to. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look for my progress. And we see our progress line here. And of course, I have manual progress and other ones. And it's just in a darker blue. So if you think of your tasks having slightly darker blue over it. Personally, when we go down here, I'm happy with all the settings. I just prefer this to be black. And that, it gives a higher contrast and it looks better for me. So if I were to show progress on a task now, we see the black line. If we had not done that, it would show up as blue. So we choose our bar styles. And the other one that I find a little bit harsh, so we have our slack showing, so this is good. But when it comes to the slack, it's down here in the bottom. So I choose just a slightly lighter shade of blue because, of course, you're only going to have slack on the non-critical tasks. There, I have them shaded blue. I need to have a slightly darker shade of blue to show the float or the slack. I find if I choose black or really, really dark blue, then it's going to confuse itself with some of the summary tasks and everything else, the other lines that are on the sheet. So that works for me, and I offer that up as an alternative. Now, the one last thing, it's not going to show up for a while as we go through the tutorials. Again, I'll go right, choose grid lines. And I'm going to go down and I'm going to choose status date. Now, status date is going to come later when we start to update our project. After we've established our plan and we've set the baseline, and then we start modifying from the baseline, we're going to do that based on the date, or the effective date, if you will, which is the status date. And it would be nice to have the status date show as a vertical line on our Gantt chart. And so I'm going to choose status date, again, a straight line. You can choose any color here. If you go red, it might look similar to the critical tasks. I'm not sure. You can choose a darker red, which might work, or an orange even. Any color, and we choose that, and we say, okay. Now you don't see that because I haven't set a status date. Just so you can see it, I'll go ahead and set a status date. So go to project, status date. And let's choose a couple days from now. And now you can see how that changes. We see a line, vertical line down the Gantt chart that shows you the date to which you're updating the project. So we're getting pretty close to all the changes I want to do. The one change I want to do, go over here, and we're going to insert a column to its left. And I'm going to choose the work breakdown structure. And then I'm going to narrow that down, maybe about there, to give yourself a little bit room for something slightly more complex. And now we can see the numbering scheme for our work breakdown structure. And that's looking not bad. I'm pretty happy with that. And the only thing, sometimes you'll see by default that it will start to list the resources on the Gantt chart behind the activity. That's great if you're dealing with a fairly simple project and just a small number of resources per task. Can start to crowd it out. Otherwise, you may want to turn that on or off by default or otherwise. So something to consider. I'm going to just leave it there for now. And so now that I've got this, what I need to do is to save it as a template so that when I come in and create a new project, I'm going to create it in accordance with that template. I don't have to redo all these settings. So the first thing I want to do is get rid of all of these tasks. Okay, and so with all of my tasks deleted, I'm ready to save that as my default. And the other thing, if you want your timeline on or off, now would be a good time to choose whether you want the timeline on. I'm going to turn it off. And so what I'm going to choose to do is to go File, Save As. And so I'm going to save it on my computer. Browse. I'm going to browse. And I put everything on OneDrive. So I'm going to go to Work. Oh. and I have a template folder, and this is where I can save all of my templates. Now, what I need to do is to go down here and choose template file. So it's going to be a project template, and then I need to give it a name. So you see I already have a template, as you would expect. In this case, I'm just going to call it tutorial template. And if I hit save, yeah, we don't want any of that. That's great. And just choose all that. I don't have much of it in there, so that should be good, and we should have an empty template. And so now, if we go File, New, you see by default it's in Office, and we can choose Personal, and any of your templates should show up here. And so if I choose a tutorial template and choose Create, and so what it did there is it basically, I had the template open, so it had to close the template so it could use the template to create a new project. And so here we have a new project, and all of you can see all of the formatting changes. Our new tasks are going to be auto-scheduled. The colors and the choices that we made are going to be reflected in that. Now, you may ask yourself, well, you know, that worked for me because I know where my templates are. How do you know where it's saving your templates? So if we go into Options and we look here and we go down to Save, you can see where the default file location is, and you can change it, as well as the save templates. And here we can say where the default personal templates location is. So you don't have to mix with the program templates. You can just use your personal templates in a separate folder. That's why they show up in the two different tabs. And so I've set that to where I want to keep my templates. And so that's where you would find that. And that's really it. So with that done, we've got our project all set up. We're ready to start entering tasks and everything else because we have a brand new clean document which is going to present the information in a way that we're going to recognize, and we don't have to fiddle too much, and it's going to do it every time. So that's the end of this. Then come on back for the next one, and we'll start entering tasks and getting everything all set up for our actual project. See you then.